focused exhibit that focuses on Dalit resistance and the stories of caste-oppressed peoples in the diaspora. My name is Sasha Sabherwal, and I'm an assistant professor in anthropology and global Asian studies at Northeastern in Boston. And it's my pleasure to welcome you today to our panel discussion around the theme of art and liberation in South Asian diaspora. We have brought together some amazing panelists, which I'll say a little bit more about. But I want to talk a little bit about the exhibit. So it is grounded in caste abolitionist frameworks, and one of the statements from the curatorial team in 2024, the curators and the research team write, to quote, "To be anti-caste is to be anti-racist." And we hope to have, for the first time ever, conversations and focus groups to begin collecting this knowledge as part of a wider understanding of addressing anti-racism in the South Asian community. Anti-Blackness exists among South Asians, and we need to address how those languages are tied to caste-based discrimination, end quote. This framework is anchored in the exhibit, and we think about the kind of complexity of caste, that caste is not race, and that race is not caste, yet these systems intersect in ways that cannot be understood in isolation. Rather than collapsing them in equivalence, a global understanding of caste centers lived experiences to examine how systems of domination operate through shared logics of hierarchy. In North America, the invisibilization of caste can make it more pervasive and difficult to confront. OVERCASTE, the exhibit, and the conversations in the panel today asks us to reckon with this tension through questions of art and storytelling as tools for liberation. We will examine in our conversation how art, archives, and lived experiences make visible caste violence that is so often obscured in policy and often obscured in academic work. We anchor caste in our discussions not to individualize it or exceptionalize its production of hierarchies. Instead, we explore how caste is tied to these experiences of race, gender, sexuality, class, and religion. The stakes are high, especially as we gather here in the Bay Area, as a region that's transformed by migration, technology, higher education, and global capital. The Bay Area is a site where caste hierarchies are reproduced across workplaces, universities, cultural institutions, and social life. At the same time, it is a place with a long history of abolitionist struggle, multiracial organizing, and a kind of radical imagination. For instance, the Dalit Dreamlands exhibit took place here in Oakland in 2024, and we're really lucky to have the curator of the exhibit here with us today, Manu. We want to also thank our incredible supporters for this project. First is Northeastern University in Oakland here, and the Mills Institute, especially Lisa Arellano, Jennifer Arthur, Annie Labe, Lynn Santopierto, and Krista Cesario for welcoming us to Oakland and for sharing Mills' rich history with us. We are also fortunate to have received an Innovations Lab grant for this project. We also want to thank our departmental supporters, including the program in Global Asian Studies, the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program, the Department of Culture, Societies, and Global Studies, and the history departments at Northeastern. We also have incredible community partners, including Poetic Justice Foundation, Belonging Matters, and Nanak Foods, who provided the mithai that is available outside. And please feel free to keep eating food. Importantly, we want to acknowledge the people who anchored this work and without whom this exhibit would not be possible. So Manmeet Singh and Radhika Narwala, who are both brilliant PhD students and seasoned anti-caste organizers in this area. And they've contributed so much intellectual labor that went into today's events. They do this work with humility and care and are just amazing people, so we're really grateful to be in collaboration with them. One last thing that I will say, I want to introduce my co-collaborator on this grant that we received to bring this exhibit here today. my colleague and dear friend, Anita Lal. Anita is co-founder of Poetic Justice Foundation, where she has been creating transformative programming for the South Asian Diaspora. She is also the director of operations at EDI at Moving Forward Family Services, and the co-curator of the exhibit alongside Dr. Sharon Sandra. And I've had the privilege of knowing Anita since 2019, when I moved to Vancouver to begin my fieldwork for my dissertation research. She was one of the first people I met there, and she welcomed me to her world and community with open arms. About a week or two after meeting, Anita asked me to come to her house, and we spent a lot of time together. She invited me to a samosa party that was being organized for her sister's wedding. She introduced me to activists and organizers who had been doing social justice work for decades, and she shared her wisdom and knowledge. I count Anita as one of the most selfless people I know, committed to building worlds anew. She generates, produces, and acts in support of spaces that challenge dominant supremacist power structures. We have become intellectual collaborators, authoring essays together and thinking across institutional and activist spaces. And she teaches me so much about how to live an ethical life, and I'm proud to be able to showcase OVERCASTE with her today. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Anita, who's going to say a little bit about the exhibit, and then we will begin the panel discussion.
Thanks, Sasha. I had no idea she was going to say all that. Hello, everyone. Welcome to OVERCASTE. My name is Anita Lal. As Sasha said, I'm co-curator of the exhibit and also co-founder of Poetic Justice Foundation. This morning when I woke up, really excited. It's the first time OVERCASTE is in the US, and for an anti-caste exhibit produced by people who are born and raised in the diaspora and come from all different backgrounds. So, we had a lot of youth that were from Dalit backgrounds, caste privileged people. Our team was very diverse and is diverse. And so I was really excited. But then waking up this morning to news about what's happening in Minneapolis today was, I know every morning we wake up to something horrific, but it was just, I can't kind of start this without sending my prayers, sending my thoughts, and about how traumatic that is. Especially as, anti-caste work is, we're working for justice, right? We're working for freedom, and this struggle is everywhere. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up and kind of put that out there. So back to me. I'm a Dalit. I come from a Tumar family, which means that my ancestors worked with leather, and we were previously called the Untouchables. As many of you may know, the practice of caste is centuries old. It can be traced back to 1500 BCE, and even though it's a grammatical concept, it can be found in all communities across South Asia, which is an important thing to always keep in mind. I myself am a Panjabi Sikh. So I'm born and raised in BC. I come from the privilege of the fact that, my family has been settlers on those lands for many generations. My great-grandfather migrated to Canada in 1906. My Mami, his photo is in my exhibit. And he's been documented as the first Dalit to come to North America. So the stories that are shared through OVERCASTE, they're the ones that are very familiar to me because they're the stories of my family, my friends, my community. And when a lot of people are like, okay, so how did OVERCASTE come across? Because I wasn't an anti-caste activist in this space. It's not something that I grew up in. Once again, a lot of privileges that I had. But as I was doing sort of community work, it would blow my mind every time I would hear somebody who's South Asian say something like, and especially when they were Panjabi, right? They would say, oh, caste isn't a problem in Canada. Nobody practices caste here. Like I said, I come from a Sikh family. And even though the religion itself was founded on the principle of caste abolition, within community, it is still practiced. Once again, being a 5th generation settler, I still know what my caste is. So, also, I hate public speaking, so when I lose my thought, you'll hear little pitches. So these stories kept showing up. They kept showing up everywhere in my space. And it wasn't just in South Asian spaces, right? So when non-South Asian people would then come and they would be like, oh, caste, that's a Hindu thing, right? And also it's been fixed, like it's abolished, what are you talking about? So how does caste show up here? And that's how Overcast came about, to answer that question. Through the stories of youth who are born and raised in Canada, showing that this is a Canadian problem. This is a Canadian thing in the diaspora. So yeah, that's what that answers. That's what the exhibit was put together to do. And before we start this conversation though, I want to emphasize that this work, this anti-caste work, can't be done in silos. So this exhibit is a story of my people who are Dalit, or people who come from caste-oppressed backgrounds in the diaspora. And we really can't fight by ourselves for this. And Overcast is a way for us to share our stories, create understanding, and work together to create that different future. But that being said, I also want to acknowledge that today, as I share the struggle and stories of caste-oppressed people within the diaspora, I do this work while living on stolen lands from the Indigenous people, where the truth and reconciliation is still a work in progress. There are still missing and murdered Indigenous women and Two-Spirit people across British Columbia who have not received justice. There are genocides happening in Sudan and Palestine, with warnings of genocide in India and Manipur and occupied Kashmir, Congo, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and we all see the violence that's happening against racialized and marginalized people here. So as we speak about caste oppression, discrimination, abolition, we want to do it in the context of freedom and justice for all those oppressed and fighting. Because no one is free until we're all free, and true freedom requires collective liberation. Thanks.
Okay, so we have the bios of our incredible panelists, Aatika Singh and Manu Kaur, that will be visible here for you all. And I have the privilege of asking a few questions to these brilliant panelists, and then we want to open up the conversation to the audience, and we will pass the mic around, so if you have any questions, please feel free. So the first set of questions that I have for our panelists are around the question of the diaspora, and I wonder, sort of one, what does anti-caste work and caste abolitionist work mean to you? And Anita has kind of elaborated on that for us. But then also, what does working within the diaspora and that relationship, how does that inform your work? Could you perhaps sort of expand on the transnational aspects of caste? Aatika, would you like to go first?
Would you like to go first? I was passing the mic. Thank you for being here, everyone. And I believe the different kind of people that we see in the hall today are what really illuminates the different understanding of caste that I've gained after myself coming to the US. And the transnational aspect for me that is rooted in the diasporic understanding of caste flows from this exact set of different people that I've been interacting with for the last 3 years, working in different capacities with as a scholar, artist, and as people who are trying to do their bit to make caste a little more less rigid in its understanding and its working and its discourse from their own positionalities and capacities. And that has really allowed me to understand that caste, none of our identities are fixed, whatever caste that we come from, and they're all shifting every day. And it has really informed my understanding of precarity and what is happening both in the US and in India at a larger political level as well. And then when I did come here, there were certain events that marked my understanding of how caste is really pervasive in the US, but from different standpoints. The first thing that I did notice was that SB 403, which is a bill that mandates that caste become a protected category in universities of higher education here, was happening, the agitation for that bill. And I had very profound experiences with those set of activists here who'd felt both ambiguity but also a lot of abundance working with people. That was one of my first initial experience, which gave me so much to think about, especially as I moved between the two continents and felt both increased mobility but also just decrease in my own emotional mobility as I was configuring what's going to happen to me and my identity, and as oppression was rising all around us. So that was one thing. Then as an artist myself, this was the time when the first statue of Dr. Ambedkar was installed in America, in Washington, DC, in October 2023. and I had then traveled there for the inauguration. And it was a wonderful event that really helped me root myself and meet new people who were working from different perspectives to not just mobilize art for anti-caste annihilation, but to also mobilize just very everyday things like a dialogue or a conversation, or in fact a samosa party, I guess. So I think, and in that sense, what I want to take back to my own work has been to always allow a mobility to inform the understanding of caste, and not just a theoretical understanding of caste to inform the framework of practice that we have for each other, whether as artists or just as like comrades to one another.
Hi. Thank you again, everyone, for coming. We're talking about, so caste abolition for me is like very personal, just like I'm sure it is for everyone here. The reason why I do this work is essentially to honor my family, my roots, my ancestors. You know, I was born in Punjab, in Ludhiana, and when I came here, like life was different for us compared to other South Asian immigrants, and I was aware of that very young. Even if we would, you know, go to like South Asian Panjabi Sikh events or even the Gurdwara, like there was always talk about caste, and it wasn't ever like, what caste are you? Sometimes it was, but it was always like, where are you from? What is your real last name? Like, where are your parents from? As a kid, people would ask me this, and even when I would do seva in the langar, like there was like, you know, like I would, like now when I look back, I would think like, oh wow, I wonder how they would feel if they knew I was Dalit and a Dalit was serving them food. I wonder how they would treat me if they knew. And my family hid behind, you know, we used Kaur and Singh. We didn't get to use our actual caste names, hoping that that would help have a better, like my parents were hoping that that would help us to have a better life here compared to Punjab. But, you know, caste travels, it doesn't just go away. And so even as a child, people in our community would try to figure out like what caste I'm from, where my family is from. And even as a young kid, my parents would tell me to don't tell anyone. Don't, if they say, if they ask you like what caste you are, say that you're Sikh, that you're Panjabi and you're Sikh. And I like literally learned that as a kid. And you know, my mom actually didn't even tell me that word Jamar until I was old enough to understand that this is not a word I should use. And so, you know, they were obviously protecting me, but, you know, they were also very afraid of their own safety too, that, you know, I'm a kid. If they were worried that if they throw this word around that I might say it, and that's how people would find out. And that's just how insidious caste is, and how like it's silenced even for people within the Dalit community because of that like shame and that fear and that internalized shame as well. And so that informs a lot of the work that I now do. A lot of the work I do is very personal. Like Anita, you know, I share as much as I can about my family history. You know, my dad was the first in our entire family to come to America, so-called America. And he was able to get education through the reservation system in Punjab. He experienced a lot of bullying by people from like Jat communities mainly. Since we're in Punjab, it's like, yes, like caste is a Brahminical construct, but it's also obviously passed down to everywhere else. And so in Punjab, mostly it seemed like the caste like oppressors were Jat for like our family. And so, you know, like he experienced a lot of bullying, a lot of just like being outcasted, just like people even being angry that he's even in the building that they're in for getting education. But he was able to do that, and he was able to come here, and I'm very grateful and privileged for that. And you know, I also understand that caste still shows up in the diaspora. We can't escape it. And just like Dalit people can't escape it, I do think that people with caste privilege can't escape their privilege either. And so I think it's important for people who have caste privilege to show up to things like this. And like I will say, it's a lot harder to get caste privileged people to show up to panels and things like this. just because people get bored. I'll be honest, like people don't want to just hear people talking. And so I think that's why it's important to do things like art events that involve dancing and community, because those are also ways to, you know, participate in caste abolition, especially if you have like ADHD or something and you just cannot focus. So that's just, yeah, I'll leave it at that for now. Okay. So it's really interesting. So, you know, I'm sure that everyone knows, like, or maybe people don't know, like, the pyramid of caste at the top are Brahmins. And so, you know, it goes down and Dalits are like untouchables because we're considered not even a part of the pyramid, part of the caste system. And so Jat people have a very interesting caste positionality because obviously they're not Brahmin and they are also oppressed by Brahmins and Kshatriyas and all these other castes. And I believe actually they are categorized as like OBC, right? Like as Shudras. So they're still part of the pyramid, but they're at the bottom of the pyramid. And so it's just interesting how, you know, like people who have caste oppression can also be the ones like participating in caste violence. And I've even experienced it and seen it even within my like Jamar community. You know, we see other Dalit communities as below us, even though we're all Dalit.
I think there's 300 subcategories within the Dalit community under the umbrella. There's like 300. So it's, those human dynamics straight up.
Do you know what they're called?
Oh,
Without saying.
even within the Jamar caste, there's different types of Jamars. But within, like, in talking about Jat people, within the context of Punjab, so Punjab is an agricultural state, and the Jat caste, they're farmers. So they're the ones who own the land. So when it comes down to power dynamics, where a lot from our background, from a Punjabi background, it ends up being the Jat caste, which are more of the oppressors than the Brahmins, because they own the land, they have the power politic, and they have the political power. So in other spaces, the dynamics kind of like work out differently. But even within the exhibit, you'll see, because a lot of the people who are sharing their stories come from a Punjabi Sikh background from the state of Punjab, a lot, like you'll see a lot of reference to Jats or Jamars, because those are the two of them. But this does, once again, it's not a homogenous space. In other spaces, it shows up differently. These are just the stories that we were sharing, and so I just wanted a little bit more context around the Jats.
Thank you all. I was wondering if you might say a little bit about art and your artwork, your art practice, and the ways that art can allow us to kind of visualize and understand caste oppression that might not be as legible through a more official or formal text. And then perhaps how does art allow you to dream of caste abolition and open up avenues for the future of your work and practice? Thank you.
I think art is incredibly important and powerful, and I think every single important movement has always had art. Art is like, it's inherently political, whether you produce it or consume it. For me, I resonate more with, like processing caste violence, processing healing from caste violence through art. Earlier on, like when I first kind of started being more open about talking about caste, especially how it shows up in my family and my community, a lot of it was kind of like events that were rooted in like lectures and workshops and showing up for like political events, like for SB43, like showing up for those, showing up for in support of it. And like joining all of the conferences and the meetings that they had to discuss the bill. And so those were things that are very important, including also speaking about it in like an academic sense and like in academia. I participated in a lot of that, but it just led to a lot of burnout for me. There was just a lot of vitriol, a lot of violence, especially like showing up for the bill, just experiencing so much like like violence, like having people say the most awful things to you. And these are people with caste privilege who are so threatened by a bill that's simply saying we want to add caste as a protected category. That's proof of casteism in itself, because why are they so bothered? Why are they like showing up in masses trying to say that this bill is like Hindu-phobic or it's racist or whatever it may be? I think that in itself already shows that casteism is still practiced here. People don't want to lose their privilege. They're scared that their kids will not be able to have that caste privilege because of this bill. And so that work is incredibly important, and I really admire folks, especially folks who I worked with in the beginning, who are still doing that work. For me, I was very, very burnt out, and I wanted to take like a break from it. Like I just couldn't keep showing up. And also like even my sister, my mom, like having them show up, having my mom also experience this like casteism, showing up to this bill and like just seeing how people treated her and talked to her. I'm very protective of my family. And so for me, I was like, why the fuck are we doing this labor? Like, why are we here experiencing this? Where are the people who should be in front of us, like, not beating somebody's ass, but doing something about it? And so that's when I decided to kind of take a back seat to that, like being like in the front, being like more, I guess, vulnerable in that sense. And so that's when I really started using art. I think that a lot of times, like, academia and like workshops, that's not always accessible, especially to community members. It can also be language that just is not easy to comprehend. It's theory, it's things like that. And for me, art is so like universal. I feel like art it evokes feelings like that you cannot explain maybe in like words. And so I feel like art is very healing, and it's also it can be very like it's resistance as well. And so I love it here. I love like being in art spaces and showing up as myself. And honestly, like a lot of the things that I've done within like art has been for my own healing, and it's been for like honoring my family and where I come from, and just actually being proud of it and not having to sit in that silence that I feel like we were taught like at a young age to protect ourselves.
Thank you. I really like how you say that it's about also being vulnerable. I do relate to that, and I feel between us it's a perfect yin and yang, because yes, like art heals, but I also love the art that disturbs, especially the art that disturbs the upper caste. I've had a fondness for it since I can remember, actually. And in my own life and work, I feel just a couple of things. One is this category of anti-caste art, anti-caste aesthetics, whatever you want to call it. I feel this is a very nebulous category to be spoken with a lot of fragility and a lot of care. It is not a given as such. And this category, for me, has been something in debate, and I've been thinking about it so much, because this is, yes, it's an exhibition, it is how we turn up, it's our dressing, it's the adornment, it's the fashion, it's all of those things, but it's also something that is so pervasive around us. It's the garments, it is the long durée of history in India and South Asian subcontinent, where all of the art forms, all of the artisanal art forms were made by Dalit and Muslim communities, were made by shepherds, were made by leather workers, as Anita was telling us. I remember growing up, I knew how to make drums. I knew a lot of other art forms that involved working with polluted material, whether it was leather, it was copper, it was different sorts of discarded metals. And I remember my grandfather, my grandmom, they taught me how to play with like clay, make statues, and so many of other things that are now becoming some sort of a bedfellow with capitalism, embroidery, let's have a healing class through crochet. These were things that we grew up doing and sharing as our resources, as our heritage. So that category of anti-caste aesthetics for me, therefore, has to be dealt with a lot of sincerity in how we speak about it. And more so, it is not just about this modern phenomena of, okay, I'm an artist sitting here, it is about my community. So we are all artisanal in that sense for me. And that genealogy matters to me a lot in my own work, therefore. And one way that I wanted to deal with art was, I wanted to write my PhD on this aspect of the artisanal and how that is informed by caste in India. So I thought of how as Anita and Manu both were telling us, land becomes a very central axis to talk about what allows caste to like germinate and what is the material factor behind how we see the form of caste today. And therefore I started to think of Ambedkar statues that are pixelated across the landscape of India, whether rural or urban, and they're desecrated almost every day to a point where I couldn't keep up with police reports, and there were more than like 5,000 desecrations per day in a single state in India. And that not just allows me to understand who owns the land, but also who owns the public space and public memory, therefore, and who's allowed to create markers to exist and to show their culture and demonstrate pride and belonging. And the desecration of those statues has been the foundation of my research at Stanford here, to look into those desecrations through multiple angles, but to also understand how for the Dalit community, my community, it was more so also, it was yes about the statue, but it was also more so about preservation of the ruins of a desecrated statue and the recreation of those ruins instead of the recreation of a statue itself, as the very proud marker of yes, we exist, how much you try to break us. The land is ours, the history is ours. And I think that in that sense, art has been very powerful medium for me to understand where I come from and what work I need to do to cultivate solidarity and cultivate a space where art is decentered every day. Art is not what we go to see in a museum. Art is what I wear, art is what I say, and art is what my philosophy is about then. Yeah, I hope that answered.
Thank you so much, Aatika and Manu. That was so incredibly informative. I think for the sake of time, I'm just going to ask one more series of questions, and then I want to open it up to the audience. I wanted to ask you all about solidarity. Aatika, you just sort of gestured to this. And Anita and I are actually really fortunate to receive a grant from the Mills Institute, organized around the framework of solidarity. And so I wanted to ask, how do we build solidarities across movements, whether it's anti-racist, feminist, queer, anti-caste? And how do we think about caste as interconnected with these larger forms of struggle, especially here in the diaspora? Yeah, Anita, do you want to start?
No. You know, it's really interesting because even when Manu spoke, and I look at the work we're doing, we look at even the team Poetic Justice. We have a very diverse team, and I feel like my work has been more supported by people who come from caste privilege backgrounds than actually from my own Dalit community. And of course, that's a lot to unpack, right? Like, there's a reason in my family it's tough. So like I said, my family's been here for a few generations, and you know, they're living their great little life. And it's like, Anita, don't you have anything better to do? Like, why are you doing this, right? You're getting so much pushback because we have gotten a lot of pushback and there's so much friction. And they also don't like to talk about their stories. It makes them vulnerable, it makes them uncomfortable. I completely get it, right? And when I started doing this work, it was people that were from, you know, the Jack caste, like it was my friends, it was people who were in this space doing other work. And they were like, no, we need to have these conversations, and you pretty much need to be the Dalit poster child, right? And I was like, really? Right? Like, this is what, but so yeah, I've been very privileged and I've been very supported by people that come from all different backgrounds and even caste privilege backgrounds. And I think the important part about this is even when I started doing the work, we do anti-caste work, right? I'm not doing Dalit work because I think I don't know yet how to connect with that, just because it's a space where there's so much, which because of my privilege and because I wasn't always raised with that, I don't feel like I can represent that, right? So that's just something I still struggle with. But anti-caste work, we all should be doing that, because it's the same thing as doing anti-racism work, right? It's like Manu said, like, just because I'm a Chmar doesn't mean it's all my responsibility to do, right? People come from privilege, and you know, there's disruption that needs to happen everywhere. So I think when it comes, and also linking in with the people who are aligned with you, right? There's a lot of people who may not be comfortable with the topic. There's a lot of people who may not want to participate, or even might want to shut it down. Work around them, right? Do not look for somebody who aligns with you 100% because you're not gonna find it. If you align with me 60, 70% and the other 30%, like, you know, you're not killing cats or something, we're good, we're good. The purity politics and all those kind of things stop and harm so many movements and so much building. And I think also, I try to focus and I try to work from this place of joy, right? This place of hope. And in like Sikhi, we talk about Chandi Kala, right? Google it. I'm not gonna do any, I'm not gonna be able to explain it. Shut up, you know it's true. It may be my next tattoo, but don't ask me for an explanation. But it is this elevated mindset where as we go through everything we go through, as we face everything we face, it's this elevated mindset and attitude that you approach your work, right? So if there wasn't a joy, if there wasn't a hope, this work would be so like full of despair. And when I see this panel, when I hear these amazing stories, when I see the people in the audience, and the solidarity is there, right? Like look for those pieces instead of having people like prove it, not, you know, cancel type of attitude, which just is like negative and stuff. I don't know if that answers you, if that's what I got.
I think that solidarity work is extremely important. I don't think that anti-caste work can exist without it. I think that like I want to honor a lot of, you know, the work that the like Black movement, like Black activists, like so much of the work that anti-caste, like, and other, you know, like, it's always like kind of based on the work that Black activists have done. And so, like, for us to not, like, show up for Black folks and to address anti-Blackness, even within, like, the Dalit community, that's us doing a disservice. And that's us, you know, betraying the very people that have allowed our, you know, anti-casteism to even exist. So I think solidarity work is extremely important, and a lot of us also exist at the intersection. We're not just Dalit, like, I'm queer, I'm non-binary, I'm a femme. And so, you know, I can't just do anti-caste work. It also informs like queer activism and like all these other spaces that I occupy as well. And so it's important for us to build those bonds. That's something that I really want to focus on, especially moving forward with Dalit Dreamlands. You know, we did experience a lot of support, and a lot of that support did come from caste privileged people, which, you know, for the first time I was like, oh my gosh, like, y'all are not yelling at us, you're actually here for us. And so that was really, really nice. That's like when I really felt like, yeah, like anti-caste work and like Dalit work, actually it's not just gonna be Dalit people doing it. We have to build solidarities. We have to show up for other people, and we have to allow other people to show up for us as well. Because like a lot of communities can be cliquey. And so I think solidarity work in that way allows like, you know, like this openness and like learning about other people's cultures and their struggles, and just like how much inner like relatability there is. And obviously there's also like very unique struggles that each community goes through. And I think to build solidarity work is to also invest in knowing about their unique struggles as well. And so that's kind of where I hope to like take more of like my learning and like Dalit Dreamlands and just doing more of my work, is I want to build solidarities. I want to learn about other struggles and like what they would need from me and my work, and how they could show up for like my work as well. So I think it's incredibly important, and I just don't think that anti-casteism can exist even without it. Like, for example, you know, the Dalit Panthers in India, like they based themselves on the Black Panthers, and they learned about the work that the Black Panthers were doing through newspapers, and that in itself is so transnational. And so that in itself proves, you know, like a lot of the work that we've done, that our people have done, we've learned from Black activists, and we've learned from that. And so it's our responsibility to also show up and continue to show up for them as well.
It's a very interesting time to talk about solidarity for me per se. We are between the death and the birth anniversary of Rohit. And we lost him like 10 years ago exactly because of institutional murder. And after that moment, as we mark his birth and death anniversary every year, I get a lot of allies wanting to display solidarity, and then they disappear for the rest of the year. So I especially wait for January to know that I have friends. But that apart, I feel To talk about the other side of solidarity in the anti-caste space is also important. These days I've heard a lot of scholarship that has come out saying Dr. Ambedkar wrote in favor of the Jews. So let's complicate the question of the genocide happening in Palestine. And that sort of solidarity is exactly the one that I wouldn't myself call solidarity. To always decontextualize and make yourself ahistorical, to only and only show just some sort of very manly fidelity to the works of Dr. Ambedkar, to his thoughts, and to not be grounded in whatever is happening around you, and to then stop yourself from providing solidarity in whatever way that you can to folks around you, and to somehow delusionally always believe that caste is the apex of being marginal, which it is not. Whatever place that you occupy and you stand as we mentioned in the beginning, today we are able to do this work after the acknowledgement that we are on stolen land and we are in the midst of a genocide. And that for me marks the beginning of understanding of something called solidarity, howsoever ephemeral. The other thing is to understand, if it is specifically about anti-caste solidarity, how gender really illuminates its two sides of the same coin. There is no anti-caste work that can happen without a conversation on gender and sexuality, essentially. And there is no anti-caste solidarity that can only be helmed through white Savarna guilt, unfortunately. It has to go beyond guilt, and it has to go beyond you all funding us, and it has to go all beyond you. There is a pre-programmed pity. And it has to start with allowing yourself to feel uncomfortable in any space that you're welcomed in any space where we're sharing the mic, and allowing yourself to not be seen as an ally, allowing yourself to be seen as a traitor, allowing yourself to be uncomfortable with me, with your friends, your family, and always wanting to lead those conversations. And that is anyways the space of friendship, right? Where you want to be seen in those uncomfortable hues, I guess. And you don't want to paint like a very performative picture. And just being here in the US, one other thing that kind of informs my context for solidarity is to pay keen attention every day with a lot of consistency and sincerity to the granular and the local. A lot of us might know about the case of Bhima Koregaon, where a lot of our friends were incarcerated for years. 4 days back, Ramesh and Sagar, the two Dalit activists who were incarcerated, got bail. But that never made it here to the news. That did not make it to our newsletters. To when we celebrate joy, to when we celebrate healing, to when we celebrate freedom and liberation. These are the small things that we pay attention to make the other feel, yeah, we are in it together. And we are not just doing it for the sake of being visible, we are doing it to make you visible. Your visibility and my visibility and our happiness are tied in that way. And yes, none of us will be free until all of us are free. These are the small ways, just to pay attention to not the theoretical, to not the scripted, to what your heart is actually telling you, and to just allow yourself to do away with these given terms like solidarity and allyship for a moment, but to really start questioning yourself, okay, what else? What else informs me? What else allows me to do this? What else is teaching me to ask these questions? And I think that is the difficult work of freedom actually that is required today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aatika. Does anyone in the audience have a question that we'd like to ask our panelists?
Hi. Thank you all so much for this panel discussion. It's been super illuminating. My name is Sonia, by the way. I'm a journalist in the Bay Area. My question is mostly for Aatika. You mentioned early in the conversation that after you moved here, you felt increased mobility, but decreased emotional mobility. And I may have misheard, but I was wondering if you could elaborate on what you were referring to and talk more about that.
Thank you for paying such keen attention to what I was saying. I think I also keep forgetting because I keep ranting a lot in my everyday. I think what I meant is, and it is still true after me being here for 3 years, my life here after getting enrolled in a PhD program has meant more mobility in terms of where I go and who I talk to and how I protect myself, which wasn't something ever available to me in India. And having come from a background of police atrocities and everyday incarceration and student activism, I felt it so deeply in my heart, I was scared for so long. And after I came here, I started to feel, okay, now I do have a bargaining chip. I may have increased financial access. I may know more people. I may have the Stanford card to play with. And in that sense, it is ugly, to be honest, to then realize, but yes, I'm emotionally still at the same stage. I have to make myself translatable for everyone here. I'm illegible. And so is my anxiety and my pain and my background. And so is my humor. So is the things I seek joy in. And it was truly difficult for me to find friends. And maybe, yes, it is because I'm based at Stanford and I had to decenter myself, go around a little around the Bay Area, meet other folks. But that also was dependent on a fucking car. I didn't realize it's coming from So, at every step of the way, you're meeting more and more like, okay, for this I need this. Life is continuously bargaining with you. Life is continuously spent waiting for that one good moment, for that one thing that will come. And in that sense, I was feeling a lot of just emotional anxiety, not wanting to translate myself, and just wanting that same circle, friend circle back, which is more organic, which doesn't require me to schedule everything. Those things were hard for me to do away with. And I guess a lot of us will relate to these stories, maybe if you're yourself first generation having moved from India to here or elsewhere, or if your parents are, or if your grandparents are, how they had to find new languages and new meanings every day, and that quest is very tiring. And to come back to that empty room also, and to know that if you're in academia, you know you shouldn't take yourself very seriously. So the PhD is going to stop making meaning after a while, and true meaning will always be in like camaraderie and love then. And that really stays with me in my heart and informs how I emotionally want to work with myself.
Hi, this is Kamardeep. I am also not great with public speaking, so I'm going to be processing out loud, and I hope a question comes out with it. A lot of the stories, like Manu, your story was really familiar, like our family hiding our last name and hoping no one in the community found out. As I got older, like particularly when I moved to the Bay, I learned more about casteism and anti-caste work, and started to understand my background a bit more. I always knew in the back of my mind that we were caste-oppressed because of the way my family dealt with caste and how much they wanted us to know and not know. Like, I didn't know my caste until high school, and it was through a very weird way where my mom was freaking out about, because I was really into pottery, so you can guess what caste that is. I always knew we weren't, like, because of the way my family's, like, weirdness around caste and, like, not talking about it and not wanting us to bring it up with other Punjabi people, I knew that we weren't from dominant caste. And so I've learned more about it, but now also, as I've gotten more in anti-caste work, I've also learned about the privileges that my family has, the caste privilege, and how my family replicates it in response to oppression from Jeffs. And and I've noticed it with a lot of oppressed castes in the Sikh community, is rather than having this solidarity across caste when we notice caste oppression, we just become more insular within our own caste and say, well, we're just as good as the Jats. We're gonna have our own Gurdwara, and this is the only caste that's allowed at this Gurdwara, and it becomes very defensive. And I haven't quite figured out how to like interrupt that. I mean, I talk with my family. I don't have like a lot of status in my family, being femme, unmarried, and I also I was born in the U.S. I'm not fluent in Panjabi, so there's just like a lot of stuff people just don't take me seriously. So I haven't quite figured out like where are the interruption points when you see this being replicated. Like I see, like my family was maybe less rigid around caste when we first migrated here, but now that there's more people from our community, they can hold on to caste practices more, and then they become more rigid with it. So it's kind of my question. I think that's a question.
this whole thing of, them not taking you seriously, it's for real. It happens to me. I mean, I'm in my 40s, right? I'm unmarried. So they're kind of like, instead of, focusing on this stuff, might go get married. Coming from a Chamar family, like one of the panels out there talks about the Shri Guru Ravidas Gurdwara and the whole story of how that came across and how that came to be. And and the reason we included that was because it wasn't because they're a separate religion or whatever, it's because they weren't being accepted and they were facing so much discrimination at the late 70s and early 80s in the Gurdwaras in Vancouver. And the families there kind of like just got sick of it, right? Like, I mean, they weren't in the langar halls in the kitchen where, they would be like, oh, don't touch the food or take your food with you. Like, it was horrible. And this is my family, right? That's experiencing this. And now the community there in Vancouver and in Surrey, there's a large Jamaat community, right? And they've been there for generations, and so they have their whole thing. And for whatever reason, the Gurdwara started, but like once again, under Sikhism, there shouldn't be 4 different types of Gurdwara, right? At that point, so even for me, within my family spaces, like I understand why it was created, it was more, but when it comes down to religious spaces, when it comes down to finding, and we're in a different space now, so what does this look like, right? So do we go in and now, do we challenge these spaces? But these other Gurdwara, I'll call them mainstream Gurdwara, I'm sure that's not the right thing to call them, but when we look at any sort of power structure, like their whole board is usually Jat privileged people, or caste privileged people who come from a Jat background, right? And they're all older men, mostly, right? And so like, when you go now, oh, we don't believe it, like even when you, and so it's like, okay, so what do? Do I go in there and try to disrupt that? I'm like, we try. There's a lot of stuff we try, but then we only have so much energy. And so my thing is, what work can I do which is going to be positive, which is going to cause disruption and change? And for me, that's like working with youth, where it's working in communities and spaces where once again, you're creating allies, you're educating, you're making people understand what the lived stories are and how caste is showing up. A lot of the times we've normalized this in our everyday life, like coming from a Panjabi background, in my music, in the movies, in like tattoos and hashtags, right? In like, your Panjabi clothes that everyone's wearing in a way, it's like, okay, there's this pride, you would use the word pride. So it's like these youth in the diaspora connecting to their heritage, to their culture, but they're not educated on what this caste hierarchy, which is completely against their religion, right? So I think it's a matter of picking and choosing your battles, right? Like as one of my friends who's like the co-founder of Poetic Justice Foundation, because once again, I'm a reactive person, so I'm also trying to figure out this whole react and respond. What's the difference, right? And he was just like, Anita, you're not gonna piss on every tree you walk by, type of thing, right? And I was like, that's kind of rude. But it makes me think, okay, so what is the strategic thing? So what is it that, okay, so you might not be able to call out or to like, do, but what can you do? What are practices that you not participate, or when it happens, dialogue. And they're not gonna like you. They're not. It's like, but in a way there will be some pride around there because yeah, I think it's picking and choosing your battles and seeing what aligns well with you, because you don't want to keep throwing off your nervous system, which has also been a topic of conversation for me for like the last couple of months. It's like making sure your nervous system is balanced while you do this work, and knowing where you can make a change and where you can have influence. Right? Because like honestly, if I go into like a certain space where it's like caste privileged older men, it's the same thing as walking into, a person of color walking into a boardroom with all white old men. How much success am I gonna have there? Is that where like, can I organize somewhere else? Can I work somewhere else? It's also interesting because I have 2 younger sisters, right? And they're both married, and they're both married into Jat families. So now I have these nieces and nephews who I'm very close with, who are half Jat and they're half Jamaat. And my thing is like, I do not want to do like Jat hating, right? Because that's not what this is about. I'm like challenging the hierarchy in this, right? So I want my niece to be as proud of like her Jamaat heritage as she is of her Jat heritage. Because I can tell you, even my sisters, my family, if they say the word Jamaat, they're not gonna say it out loud, it's a whisper. There's a tension. Because once again, like, you know, you talked about, there's a shame that is just inherent in how a caste privileged person, even if they might not be casteist, know what caste they are. Because in that family, it wasn't hidden. You know where you, like, if there's like some sort of like, you know, ambiguity around it, that was a big word for me, around it, you know, because like even me, like I didn't know what caste I was till I was like 14 or 15. Once again, huge amount of privilege to be able to live to that time to like not be in it. But, so I think it's that education, it's taking the hierarchy out of it, because like even when it comes down to like Sikhi, and there's a lot of conversations like, you know, Guru Ravi Das, which is one of the Chamad peoples believe in Guru Ravi Das, and he is not one of the 10 gurus, right? So there's conversations around that, which is a whole different conversation. But that's not why these Gurdwaras started. These Gurdwaras started because they weren't welcome, and they were still being treated like untouchable in that space. So they became a safe space for them to practice their religion. But yeah, like when I do anti-caste work, it's like I look at the future, I look at my nieces and nephews, and I want them to have this rich history, right? Of both. Like there's so much resilience that comes from both lineages, right? And the stories are different and all that. And I think you're 100% right. It's that educating. It's creating that bit of tension. So the next time there's like, you know, a 20-year-old dude wants to go and hashtag Jut as a tattoo, like he thinks about it a little bit more, right? Maybe just put a tractor or something.
Well, what you've asked for me is more of a space of learning than honestly saying anything. So I've been listening, and this has been very interesting for me to also think about, except just one thing that I want to say about having separate gurudwaras, which is from the Indian context largely, if you cultivate that land is yours. Which is why we need our separate spaces, and this conversation has to go beyond just build structures. It has to go to labor, and it has to go to other aspects of what spaces we occupy, and where we can truly make meaning with each other and feel safe. And all of those big acres of land in India and especially because I'm saying this in the context of the farmers' movement, which was one of the largest movement post the independence of India in India's history. It really showed us how there has been no redistribution of land at all, and most Dalit farmers are without land till today, despite the promises of all governments. So if you till it, you own it, is what I want to say. And whatever you make on it, whether a statue or a gurudwara, is then up to you. And then that also provides access to our Dalit women to do so much with land and to have their own separate mobility. That's one thing, and I guess this is something I'm just on a learning curve, having just recently moved. There is a beauty in not belonging everywhere.
Thank you. First of all, I'm a little nervous, but very, very grateful for this panel because I'm learning about caste as an Indian. Definitely didn't know my caste either. Knew that I wasn't in any of the upper castes, but didn't know about it. And so what's been interesting is I moved to this country when I was 13, and so I have done a lot of work. I'm a social worker and mental health professional, so I've done a lot of advocacy work in racial equity inclusion, understood and tried to learn this country's racism system and understand that. So what's been really fascinating is I actually didn't learn about caste until I read Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste. Highly, highly recommend. She's not paying me for a dime, but you absolutely. And there's also a movie that Ava DuVernay did on Origin. So eventually made my parents watch it. They were very uncomfortable by it, but try it. But I bring up, I don't know if there is a question just like you, like I'm processing as I'm thinking about it. My curiosity lies in, I am trying in my own small ways to have those very uncomfortable conversations and get educated myself. Because until I read the book Caste and went on the rabbit hole, I didn't even realize that Dr. Ambedkar got his scholarship in the city that I grew up in for 13 years in Baroda in Gujarat, who where the king in Baroda had started something, their version of affirmative action, but I never learned about it. I learned about him starting the Bank of Baroda and the railway system, but never actually that he also was very big on affirmative action and having scholarships for individuals like Dr. Ambedkar to have 2 degrees, one from UK and one from US. So I've kind of gone on the rabbit hole, especially as an advocate. I'm always like, okay, let me dig further. But I'm curious, as someone who is new to this conversation in the sense of just understanding the hierarchies or going beyond what's your last name, because that I know, like I've understood that. How would you like actually understand, how do I educate myself and others while also learning the system? Because just like the United States has sort of whitewashed their history and not really talk about slavery, and that was long ago, we don't have to talk about it, which is also, by the way, very interesting. Clearly I have ADHD as I'm talking. It was very interesting with the SB bill that the whole conversation was, this was so long ago, you were perpetuating and making Hindus look bad, very similar to the conversation on race here. And it was fascinating to have these conversations with my younger cousins who were in their 20s, and they're like, why do we need that? And I would be like, well, isn't that the same thing as having civil rights? And the conversations they were having was very much from the Hindu organizations that were saying, you know, the key points that they were making. So it was really fascinating to kind of see the same trajectory of what happens in this country to silence conversations around anti-racism be very much played out in India. So I'm curious, how do I educate myself, and in the small ways that I'm trying to educate myself and others, like what are some ways? This was great, and I'm like writing down every single like label there, so okay, I'm gonna read up more. But I'm just curious about like, how do you get to educate yourself? Because I come from a family where we don't talk about caste. And it's almost been, and even in India, it's like, that was caste was banned, so we don't have to talk about it. And I know that that's obviously not true. So, yeah, just curious about it. I don't know if that even makes a forming question, but yeah, lots of thoughts going on as I'm listening to this panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing. I guess we are all also processing along with the audiences. But I want to say I'm going to take a leaf out of my own life, because I don't really have a scripted answer for this and not really a framework to like share with you. Just a few days back, there was like this massive protest in New York, where a group of like upper caste folks had gathered together to protest against a lawyer who was given some slight punishment in India. And that happened because that lawyer had hurled a shoe at the Chief Justice of India, who's the first Dalit Chief Justice of India, in public. And the Chief Justice decided not to cancel his bar license, but to instead give him like just a warning and to let him off, because it would have been a reification of so much humiliation that even if you're the Chief Justice of a goddamn nation, you're being hurled a shoe at. And it happened in the name of Sanatan Dharma. But the protest had ramifications till the US, till New York. And for people here, I think that's a good way to learn. To know what's happening around you and to have those inform your everyday conversations and allow that to really discomfort you. Allow that to move you to action. Not in the sense of just going to protests and making sure that you're donating your monthly CSR bill off, but to just really allow yourself to have really uncomfortable conversations with the folks around you, and to ensure that those conversations don't really have an end. They go on as we all figure our own works out. And just the other thing is to keep in mind is just how much caste deaths inform our work, and not just caste information. So the trauma we carry would be significantly on a different scale and depth, and to always keep in mind that your comrade is better defamed than dead, right? Which is why to not give up on each other, and to always be open to listening, and to always problematizing what you see around yourself. I guess for me, that is where I always start.
Yeah, that resonates a lot. I think even for me, like I'm constantly learning, so I'm also looking for those spaces because like I just know like maybe this much, and a lot of it is like lived experiences. You know, like I'm in STEM. Like I don't always have the language or the knowledge around it, but I'm trying to learn. I try to follow, like even on social media. I know everyone's not on social media, but I try to follow like Dalit leaders, especially like Dalit feminist leaders and Dalit queer leaders. Because I think shared knowledge is really important, and I understand that it's hard to kind of figure out where do I start, but you showing up here is you starting, and I think like now that you know like us and like our work, you can also like learn the people that we learn from, and that's just kind of like how it builds. There's also like certain Dalit organizations, I don't know if it's still happening, but they do workshops. They used to provide this program where every Sunday you took a class, and it's a workshop for like 2 or 3 months, and it involved reading, it involved assignments, it involved discussing like focus groups, things like that. I think that's a great way if like that's how you learn best, is through like a class kind of thing. But I also think like I understand that your family doesn't want to talk about it, and my family was like that too, and they still are to this day. Like it's hard. But I push, and I'm mindful, like I try to have like a trauma lens, like I understand that they don't want to bring up things that are painful, but I try to normalize it. Like if they don't want to talk about it, I'll start talking about it. And I think as you get more and more like comfortable, because at first it's hard, right? Just like with anything, it's kind of like exposure therapy. So I just like keep trying to bring it up because I know I can learn a lot from like my parents, my family, my community members. And so just having those conversations, like going to workshops and like showing up to spaces that are like very intentionally anti-caste is like a great way to start.
I want to start by saying actually, like, thank you so much for sharing your guys' stories and for processing with us. Because for me personally as well, like this work is how I come to understand sharing the stories. And it's not just like us who come from caste oppressed backgrounds, but even like Manmeet and Sasha, I mean, they put frameworks and language to what I've been experiencing, right? Because I know a lot of the family's not sharing, so sometimes there's not language around it. But I think curiosity, right? And you're not starting, you're already on the journey. Like we're all on this journey. It's not like a course where here's your reading material and at the end of it there's gonna be, and it's always changing, right? And there's so many different layers within even Dalit spaces. So I think like whenever we do any sort of anti-racism, anti-oppression, anti-caste work, it's just continuously showing up, learning, listening, and disrupting, and being part of this. Like when we talk about, collectively working across these silos and building, and always showing up with grace, right? So being graceful to yourself as you learn, but also to others in your space that are learning, right? So I know a bit more today than I did yesterday. The person, okay, they're not stupid, they're not an idiot, they might be annoying, but you know what, help them. Spend that time sharing your story, because like, once again, it's a different lens and people have it. So there's a lot of people to follow. And I'm gonna be very honest, like trying to educate myself in Dalit spaces, sometimes it's really heavy, right? And coming from somebody who's born and raised in the diaspora, who comes from a Panjabi Sikh background, it's foreign to me, right? So like if we're talking about like other places outside of Punjab and how caste shows up for them, it shows up differently for me being Panjabi Sikh. And so I'm learning, and there's times where I'm like just listening to Aatika talk about her background and her stories and being from India. So we're not going to get a PhD in this, you know what I mean? Want. We can definitely be students and be on this journey, and everyone just know is showing up at a different place. There's lots of writers, there's lots of, you know, people to follow, and I just kind of like go with the ones who like, you know, catch my attention, and it depends on where I am at it. So, yeah.
No, we can talk about book recommendations later.
Hi, Simi, caste privileged person, so I welcome all reflections, pushback, anything like that. But when we're talking about, you know, caste privileged people being educated, it's been really interesting to be in. Also, I live in the psychoanalytic world, so if I'm not making sense, just let me know. We live in this weird theoretical world, but it's been really interesting for us to start theoretically thinking about what happens with caste privileged people that coming into this country and then experiencing that the violence and the injury that comes from becoming racialized in a very different way here, and what we do with that injury, that we then double down on the way that we feel superior in this other way. And how do we begin to start to talk with our communities about this? Like, what is it that we're doing with our wounds, and how we end up replicating the violence that's done to us? And it's something that absolutely really breaks my heart, and it's been a really interesting place to have these conversations with my family too, of like, why are we doing this? Like, what was your experience here, and why are we doubling down on this, and can we start to think about this? And the defensiveness that I'm met with, but then the defensiveness is met with tears, where it's like, but Simi, like, you don't know what it was like for us, and I'm like, but then it's okay to be violent? Like, what the fuck's happening here? I always cuss. But it's something that's on my mind, is that I think saying uneducated also just lets us off the hook, right? It's also violence.
I feel like Amit can answer this question probably better than us.
Oh, no.
What I do sense in the front. One of those.
I think he was flashing us all the battery hand.
So he's standing up?
Yeah, I think you might have to. Oh.
What I do sense is just how to work better with an anti-caste framework in the everyday. Correct me if I'm wrong. And just something I would additionally add to it is, it wouldn't come to you as anti-caste framework. It wouldn't come to you as a learning. It would come to you in the very vernacular and the niche. It would come to you as, what is your taste? Do you look down upon people who dress differently? What is informing your values there? What do you think is the notion of beauty? I think I'm audible.
Yeah.
What is the notion of beauty in your life?
And if you are continuously like at unease with having seen certain other styles come up, which is often what informs my understanding of art. If people see a very bronzy, static statue, they would rather give it more respect than seeing a handmade one, which looks more orthodox and it has an excess of like more makeup on it, more cheap material being in the armature of it. These are the things in which life informs us what is really the reasoning behind how caste seeps into the everyday. And it's like oftentimes I've asked these questions to my own family, to my other friends from different caste positionalities. Why do you find this particular item song vulgar? What is the obscene here for you? Because mostly my work is in the realm of culture, but these ideas of the cringe, these ideas of things that give us unease, and this contempt for the working classes and how we interact with them is exactly how you can do your bit for anti-caste annihilation. Instead of having a given theoretical framework or a psychoanalytical one for this is what it should seem like and it will look like this. And this is how the residue of caste touches all of us on an everyday basis, I would say.
I think what Anita said about like curiosity
I think that is like, it can be helpful just to come from it from a standpoint of curiosity. Like, why do they feel so defensive about this? And like, why can't these things coexist? I used to be so like adamant, like you have to talk to your family about this, and it's okay if you're gonna get disowned, like blah blah blah. And like I think over the years I've learned to have more compassion and more grace. I understand that it's not always easy to talk about these things, especially with like our family members who have also experienced other forms of trauma and who might feel like us bringing these things up might erase that. Like they feel like, you know, like what about my trauma? And so I think it's important to come from like a place of like curiosity of like, well, I know that you feel this pain, but what about this pain that, you know, we may be causing? Like, can we have them coexist? So I think curiosity is just like, at least like the best way to go about things that are difficult like that.
It's complex, right? It's complex because it's your family, you're trying to figure this out. You almost even want to like direct this anger at somebody and have them change, right? But then this is like, their whole lived experience. It's like what they've been taught is right and wrong. That is just the way it is. And because we don't talk about it that much, it's not even that we can have a debate. But I think sometimes like if we look at our values, right? So like kind of like, and like I said, I'm a very reactive person, right? So like, I have like, about like one round of conversation, then after that I just pretty usually tell them to F off and I'm done, right? So this takes a lot of work for me. But I think a value system, right? So like what do we value? Who are we, right? Whether it's a religious thing, when it comes down to human rights and like, and then unpacking the fact that they might not even realize what that oppression and what that trauma and how it's playing out, right? So is there room for this conversation? And you know what, sometimes there might not be, right? That's another, how everybody has that cringe uncle who like, say, white people talk about Thanksgiving dinner and he's saying very inappropriate things that might be like, a Trump supporter. And after a while you're just like, okay, there's just no going there, but my other work, right? So you can work around it. What values am I teaching? Are me and my siblings talking about? Am I teaching my kids, right? So like, and what values am I then living on through what I've learned? I think also like, and it doesn't just happen in like, caste privileged spaces. I'm gonna tell a quick story. So once again, my family's been in Canada for a long time, but the first time my family actually married out of caste was in year 2000, where my cousin decided to marry someone who's from they're Rajput, so from a Kshatriya caste, and they're Sikh, right? And his family is very anti-caste, does not believe in caste at all, had no issues with the fact that we're Chamad. My family, on the other hand, was like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, we're not supporting this. We do not do this. We do not marry into these houses. Do you know what these people are like? Right? And so this is like 20 years ago, so like I'm in my 20s, right? And so I'm talking to my uncle, being a dumbass kid that I am. I'm like, well, what are you talking about? We're moving up. We're moving on up. We're the Jeffersons right now, right? Not that I really know much about the Jeffersons, but that's always the song, right? And then my uncle just looked at me and he's like, you guys born and raised here are so stupid, right? He's like, do you realize that we understand that this family is very anti-caste, they welcomed us in, they're very nice people, and they may not never once bring up caste, right, with us. But you're marrying into a family, and we're gonna send our daughter, which is like, honor, vulnerable, we're a very patriarchal sort of, space, and so we're sending our daughter into their house. And at one point, when somebody in their family is gonna turn around and say, Chamara di Kuri, so you're a daughter of a Chamar, what are we gonna do? How are we gonna be? Like, there's nothing we can fight against. They were powerless, and they were vulnerable. And he's like, this is what we're trying to tell you. You guys don't know. You guys haven't lived through this. This is still coming out in every generation, and we're trying to protect you. And I felt really stupid. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, I get it. So we're not actually trying to marry on up and be better, right? They're actually just protecting us in this space. And I mean, they got married. They just celebrated their 25th anniversary. They have 2 kids. One of the kids did their summer thing at Poetic Justice. It's been like it's a great relation. And our family learned a lot from it too, right? In the sense where like we did healing, or they did healing through the fact that our daughter has now moved. There is shift that's happening.
So I think like once again, showing up with grace, showing up with patience, understanding that, you know, and I think like when we say it just need for education, this isn't a Ambedkar quote. This is what poetic justice honestly is like: educate, agitate, organize. The more we get educated, and that's where then those like casteist things start prickling you, right? Or plant these seeds and wait for them to grow. Change isn't gonna happen overnight, but like, you know, if like within our spaces, like my sisters, my nieces, my cousins, if I get them a little bit more conscious about, well, that's casteist. Actually, do you know what that actually looks like, or why they're being like this? Colorism is casteist, right? And then so then next time they go and they're gonna make a comment about beauty and them being so, you know, light skinned, they'll stop a little bit, right? So like education, I think, is, and I don't think it's like they're all products of what they were raised in. It's not an excuse, it's just a way to have more understanding and to be able to work together without so much guilt, and like be in tension, because change isn't gonna happen without tension. But then there's like a positive type of tension, right? That energy where you're working towards something that's gonna be positive change, versus that heavy tension where it's like, we suck and we're horrible people and you're a horrible person and right? So it's like that energy type of thing.
I think we have time for just one more question, so maybe in the front here, and then hopefully we can have more conversations afterwards.
So I guess I thought it was interesting. Manu and Aatika both presented talking about art in these spaces. I mean, speaking of someone who has a very hard time in lectures and paying attention, I thought it was interesting that you said that like it's a very good way to bring people in. And then Aatika had a different point about how art and especially statues mark the land and who owns it and the memories that are allowed to remain, things like that. So, and speaking of someone who's fully removed from the art world, so I guess I wondered, especially in a political sense, do you imagine art as having like a kind of universal role across like continents and across like time, or is it more, do you see like especially in the diaspora versus India being a very different landscape of how art is used in activism spaces, or art exists in activism spaces?
I'm glad that you brought that up. I haven't really talked a lot about it, but like, you know, like us being in the diaspora and kind of being raised in the diaspora, we have a lot of privilege, right? Like Dalit people who grew up here versus like Dalit people who are still in India, like we have a lot of caste privilege, and for us to even be here, like talking about this, we get treated differently, right? Like if you're an activist in India, you're gonna experience a different type of violence than maybe here. And so like with Dalit Dreamlands, like, you know, we had a lot of artists from India and from other like areas too of the world, so it was transnational. But with that, there was a care that was needed that like I feel like we maybe didn't meet up to, and like that's a learning process and a learning curve. But art shows up differently than from here versus there, and that's something that I had to learn like maybe like the harder way. And I feel like that a lot of that has to do with like privilege and how systems function maybe in India versus how they function here. But I do think that it's so important for us to work through art with like different, you know, worlds, because I do think that that's another way of solidarity building. So yeah.
Yeah, I really like it when techies start to enter the art space and feel like they're walking on eggshells. I really love that feeling. But there are of course so many differences about how art operates here than like in the entire South Asian subcontinent, where it has a broader historical genealogy of where it comes from, which communities like still carry on that tradition, and so on and so forth. Apart from that, there is something that Ambedkar talks about, which is called the curse of the political, which means that caste has been primarily dealt with and understood through a political economic lens, which prioritizes sociology and religion. And art, therefore, and culture broadly takes like the backstage always in all these anti-caste conversations on, hey, let's talk about caste and how like the abolition work, so on and so forth. Whereas all of us and our cultures primarily marks and starts with our caste positionality more than anything else. And as I was saying, it is not just about what you watch, what you eat, and what you consume, and what informs you and your choices and likes and dislikes. It goes, and I think this is the work that diaspora needs to do, to be aware of that, especially like their food choices, and on a daily basis, which are the artists that they want to support, which are the museums that they go to, which are the films that they have watched from India, and what are the images that they paint of the entire nation in broad strokes in their mind, and what has been their point of affinities and dissonances when it comes to India, and how has caste informed them. That is the work of the artists here, I believe. And this is one big difference I felt like coming from India, where art was, it was still decentered, it was still at the backstage. So anti-caste aesthetic for me, the first time I met someone who was writing about it was like as recent as like 5 years back. And there has been no inquiry in the South Asian art history canon, and it's mostly Radha Krishna dancing nude under trees. Apart from that, there is nothing else in art history of South Asia, majorly. And I was so happy, like I felt like belonging for the first time when I met my professor. And after that, it has still been codified and canonized into, oh, Maithili art, oh, Gond art, this tribal does this art. But it is not that. That canon is more loose, it's more organic, and it proliferates and informs your everyday. As I keep saying, and like things like knowing material histories of like the fabric and what your family has worked with and occupied and they deal with, what are their preferences, what is in their safe, what has allowed them to come wherever they are. These are ways to know how culture and art is marking your caste and what is informing you on a daily basis, which is a conversation that is difficult in both the places, to be honest. If I ask you, like, give me the name of top 5 Dalit artists right now, it becomes a difficult thing to do. And I'm not asking you to have them on your fingertips, and I'm not asking you to like do 1, 2, 3, these are my likes, but I'm asking you to be aware, okay, fabric, for example, cotton is something that is cultivated and reared. So is silk by Dalit communities in different regions in India. I'm asking to know where you come from and to honor that history, which is your way of understanding both the contradictions in how art spaces operate here versus in India, but also then to realize your complicity and the institutional complicity that we see in making art something of a pursuit of the elite.
This is the learning. Like, this is the learning for me, because once again, when I come into caste work, when I come to anti-caste work, once again, it's from this different lens, and then you hear this, and it goes deeper, and you're like, oh my god, material? Like, still, like, you know, going and looking at it. I think for, you know, you talked about art before. What I find really interesting, and I'm going to talk just like mainstream stuff, right? So when we look at music, when we look at actors, when we look at films, there are so many of these Panjabi artists which come from caste-oppressed backgrounds, but still sing about jokes, and you know, show up, you know, and that is once again where their focus is. And so I find that interesting. And now there's this latest sort of kind of like, there's people who are coming from Jamar backgrounds, and they're making songs about Jamar. And it's so interesting because, like, I'm not joking, and I probably shouldn't say this, but I mean, the first time I heard it, I kind of cringed. Why? Because this is, you know, this is how we've never publicly, openly, and I'm like, yo, no, actually, power to you. Like, I might not like your song, just in general, for other reasons, but there is this wave. And, you know, there's so many poets, there's so many writers who never actually got a platform, right? So, like, you know, when we look at, and once again, I always talk from a Punjab context because that's just what my thing is, but, like, there's, during, like, the 60s and 70s, and, like, you know, there's all these, like, you know, communist movements, and there was all these and there were so many people that came from caste-oppressed backgrounds, and one of the writers that, first time I ever even heard of him was, I was at this Jaipur Lit Festival, and his name is Anita Lal, and he is a caste-oppressed, right, and oh my god, the writing, right, it's like, it's heartbreaking, because he talks about his life. And I kind of compare it now, like, you know, when we read a lot of Palestinian writing, people from Gaza, art is so disruptive. So, like, and especially for me, when it comes down to storytelling, oral history shared through poetry, and even images. You talked about Dalit Panthers, that Black Panther, right? Which is the Panther party here. Like that is art. That is, and it resonates within the Dalit community. It resonates here within spaces, and it's like, it's powerful, it's disruptive, and it carries so much. It carries so much, and you can connect with it in so many different ways. So even me, I'm not an artist. Like when that's, in case you guys noticed, when we talked about the art question, I didn't answer at all. But storytelling is such an art, and that is such a connector, and it can be done in so many different ways. So and it's always been part of political movements. It's always been part of that resistance. Art has always, whether it's in song, whether it's in, once again, poetry, whether it's in like, you know, paintings and drawings. So yeah.
Well, I think that concludes the panel discussion. I want to join you all in thanking our wonderful panelists. Very quickly, I just want to turn our attention to Manu, who has a few things to say here.
Oh, thank you. Actually, the fact that y'all ended on talking about storytelling and the importance of storytelling is a great transition for a plug that I was going to do. So, Poetic Justice Foundation is actually partnering with the SIG LGBTQIA Oral History Project to further this important work of tending to the gap that exists in the documentation of oral histories and stories around caste. So particularly the initiative that we're putting together in collaboration called the Caste-oppressed initiative is a call out for caste-oppressed and Dalit Sikhs to share their stories. So the oral histories will be documented and shared within an archive within the Sikh LGBTQIA Oral History Project. So that's qtsikhtarchive.org. So anyways, if you yourself or if you know other folks who identify as Sikhs and Dalit or caste-oppressed and are based within the North American context, please scan this QR code for more information and or share with other folks within the network. And also, so I'll just give a second for folks to scan or take a picture of the slide for more information there. And then we also wanted to, as we move towards closing, just point your attention to the feedback form as well. So yeah, if on your way out, please do give us feedback and let us know how the event was. And I'll
Say
pass
nice
it back.
things about us, please.
Yes, please. And I'll pass it back to Sasha for the closing remarks.
I just want to thank you all for being in conversation with us. As Aatika mentioned, solidarity is so much more than performative. It is an expansive solidarity, one that requires the kind of betrayal to be a traitor, to kind of think beyond the kind of multicultural tokenizing or the kind of liberal guilt, and to refuse to sit in discomfort, as Aatika mentioned. And as so many of our panelists have shared, I hope that this moves you to action, to have more conversations across spaces in the diaspora. And here today, we think a lot about the transnational. And so I think that I hope that we can continue this work, especially here in the Bay Area. And thank you